While it isn't the closest port to Komodo, the Mermaid dive boats actually depart from Bali because it's easier to get to for international folks like us. The downside is the crossing from Bali to where the dives begin takes quite a while, so the first and the last day have a lot of just sitting around as the boat traverses. And so, sadly, this was going to be our last full day of diving, with just 2 morning dives the following day. Coffee plus bang bang bar. We could tell by the way the boat had been tossed around all morning that we were going to have current issues. And sure enough, before the dive briefing, all of the dive staff took off on a dinghy to go check and see if the site was even going to be doable. The decision was, yes, it was doable, and this was going to be a drift dive, aka one of Tater's favorites. From the moment we dropped in, it was pleasantly warm and clear, but we could feel the current pulling us in the direction we were going to go. Despite the urge we as divers have to go deeper, the shallows are always really pretty since the sunlight filters down, and in this case it was mostly protected from the current, so we could just kind of relax and play with the millions of fish. This is a juvenile batfish. They're actually highly prized in the aquarium hobby. People like them because they look so distinct with that bright orange kind of fringe on them. Unfortunately, once they grow up, they turn into a very plain looking fish that's hard to keep in the aquarium. Once we were out of the shallows, that's where the current really took over and we were just along for the ride. The power that you feel of the water moving all around you and carrying you around is hard to describe unless you've really been in the middle of it. It can be really relaxing if you are taters and are just flying along having a grand old time, or if you're me, you find yourself focused too much on where are all the other divers and just paying attention to see if anybody's having an issue. I guess that's what I get for going and getting my DM. Taters agreed to take over the GoPro for a little while, which meant I both got to relax and I became a much better diver, as if by magic. Cameras are really the worst. Since the guide is the one with knowledge of the dive site, you're supposed to stay behind them. Unfortunately, the current has a habit of pushing people at different speeds, leaving us occasionally getting ahead of him and having to fight the current gently in order to let him catch up. Why gently? Well, if you kick as hard as you can against the current and you've got muscly legs like me, you can actually end up where you can't get enough oxygen in through your regulator and it will briefly feel like you're drowning. It's really not pleasant. After a little while, Taters had had enough of being dragged down by the camera and passed it back to me. When everybody was getting lowish on air, we curved back into the shallows, getting protected from the current, and that's when we popped the SMB and got picked up by the dinghy. The SMB is a surface marker buoy and basically a brightly colored balloon that we deploy a few minutes before we're going to surface, both so boats in the area don't run us over and so any boat that's picking us up can find us.
As expected, lots of current on that one. Hard part is actually staying with the dive guide. Since he's a little guy, I tend to go like flying off past him, so then I have to spend all this energy kicking against the current waiting for him to catch up so we don't get separated. And then it's always interesting right at the end trying to find a place for a safety stop, but went pretty well. I just burned through a lot of air on current dives.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. This time.
Our next dive's currently delayed about 50 minutes because we're fighting current to get over there.
The next dive is kind of unique and cool because we're doing it on the side of an active volcano. The side is called Hot Rocks because there are bubbles coming up from all the volcanic activity, and if you put your hand up against the sand on the bottom, you can actually feel the warmth coming up. We were also fighting less than ideal current conditions again, and you can see visibility was far lower from some of our other dives. Once we were down, the black sand is just really striking. We actually had an aquarium that had black sand, and it really makes any corals pop. The bubbles are coming up all over in the shallows. You can see that we're getting a bit of surge knocking us back and forth. That got better down deep, but it got significantly colder. Once we did go down to the deeper section, the current limited us to a very small area, and with 3 separate dive groups in the same area, avoiding other people became a challenge. So about the only thing I really recorded down there, since it was so dim, is this anemone, which was literally so bright it was glowing. Again, due to the surge and having to keep out of the worst of the current, we did go through our air a bit faster. The third dive of the day was located nearby at a spot called Lighthouse. Due to the current, they decided to drop us in a little bit of a different place, but they told us, don't worry, just a little bit of a current, and promised that the dive would be very easy, very beautiful. This kind of became a running joke for the rest of the trip because we ended up dropping down into a strong down current. With a down current, basically the current is smacking into the island and then shooting down. So if you don't do anything, you are pushed down into deeper water. This can be a concern, particularly if you're on nitrox, where if you go below about 111 feet, the gas mixture you're breathing can be dangerous. And of course, constantly fighting against the current to prevent you from going down deeper takes a lot of air and energy. Jen might love clownfish to death, particularly if they are hosting an anemone, but I've had enough experience with them where I know they do get kind of territorial. This guy came out to pick a fight with me despite the fact I was 100 times bigger than him. Most of us would say this dive was not our favorite. However, for taters, it became top tier because we ran into this little cuttlefish. I'm not sure if it's due to the name or the fact they look like a cute little chibi Cthulhu, but she absolutely adores cuttlefish and gets super excited anytime we find one. This guy was pretty small and he kept flashing colors, so we would go from white to brown or red. It was kind of hard to tell because, the color spectrum was filtered out. That's actually the reason why most of these videos on this dive look kind of black and white, just because we didn't have really good visibility, so the red color spectrum was being filtered out. Fortunately, when we got to the far side of the bay and we started to get a little shallower, things improved and we saw more corals. Also, the current was a little more manageable at this point. This is a ribbon eel. They're some combination of brilliant yellow and brilliant blue, depending on the gender and where they are in their life cycle. Really cool things, but they're usually just sticking out of rocks like this, similar to moray eels. The guide was actually able to tease them out a little bit more with his pointer. We spent our surface interval floating off the side of the island of Sangyang, which is an active volcano. That structure you see is actually a village built around a boat. Basically, they build a boat around some trees in a traditional Indonesian fashion. When we were here a couple of years ago, part of the trip was actually a tour of that village. But due to COVID, etc., that wasn't happening. So we basically relaxed, watched the sunset, and waited for it to get dark so we could do our night dive.
This is the area where we dive. I will not say very simple anymore. But it's supposed to be. I watch the lights, they are not moving too much. That means they are quiet.
Bonto was actually the best night dive we did. Classic Komodo, lots of little stuff, really cool things to see, and an absolute failure as far as something that I can capture decently on my GoPro. In general, I have been really happy with my GoPro 10, but trying to film little things just doesn't work out of the box. This dive had me resolve to make sure and get that backscatter macro kit before I came out again. One of the few big things we did see was this black-finned snake eel. At first we saw one where just the head was exposed, since they like to bury themselves in the sand and ambush. And then a little bit later we actually caught him swimming around in the open. This dive was one that Jen had been really looking forward to because it was the best chance to see bobtail squid. Bobtail squid are these brilliant little guys that look really amazing when you see a picture, and then you see them in person and they're pretty tiny. Basically, you swim around looking at the sand, just trying to catch sight of a pair of eyes watching you where they're buried. If you go up and tap nearby on the sand with your pointer, they'll generally come up, look at you all disgruntled, swim a short distance, and then bury themselves again. And of course, because they're so little and cute, this was all Jen cared about. The rest of us did see a couple of things like lionfish or pufferfish, though. Eventually, I gave up trying to film anything small and just enjoyed the dive, occasionally filming something big like this cuttlefish. And then the dive was over. Happy birthday to you.